Let's jump into the Akashic record reading for Drake and Kendrick Lamar. Two of the biggest rappers, arguably, in the world right now, have been fighting. And there's so much psychic and past life karmic patterns that are underlining this beef that they're having. It's not just two celebrities fighting. There's so much more to it. So this is definitely a world exclusive. My name is Erin. I am a magical enchantress, Akashic record reader, elemental and divine cosmic channel, and sound healer singer. And I use my mastery of the ether element in addition to my strong intellect to pull these readings that we can all learn from on celebrities. I have a lot to say on this topic because there's so many ways that I can tackle it. As an intellectual, I'm so interested in the racial components of it. As a psychic, I'm so interested in reading these two guys' energy and what's motivating them in their current life to behave the way they are. And as an Akashic record reader, it's so interesting to see their past life connection. So I'm going to tackle it from every angle that I can and try to create a complete picture, which is something that I also do in my readings, by the way. If you would like your own private reading for you personally, I do offer that on my booking page, so check that out. I am offering 40% off for new customers only. So if you're very first time booking, you do get 40% off for a limited time. All that said, let me jump in. We're going to look into the origins of why they don't like each other. We're going to talk a little bit about slavery. We're going to talk a little bit about gangs. It'll be really fun. Kendrick is an African-American rapper. He's from the Bay. It is a rough area, generally speaking. He did grow up in poverty. He grew up around gang violence, but he grew up in the culture that helped to invent and up until recently has been the only culture to revolutionize rap music. And he's very much a product of those original philosophies that hip hop and rap and its culture were based off of. So he's very classic in his own way. His image revolves around trying to be a beacon of hope for people who are in dark places. He's really about his community. He comes from a hard background because he's meant to speak to people who are also coming from a hard background and give them hope. And that's so beautiful. He is a tribalist. He is just he's very regional specific. Part of that is by design, divine design, because some people really need to be very locally centered. His highest expression is to be a prophet. There are a lot of prophets who incarnated as rappers, especially in the late 90s and 2000s as the religion began to fall and pastors kind of fell out of favor. Prophets usually have a tendency to go where there's hardship, and they usually speak to people who are in the most need. Tupac had a very strong prophet archetype. Kendrick kind of looks up to Tupac almost as a tribal elder, like a musical tribal elder, because they came from the same area and they are doing the same genre of music. Again, that's that tribal mentality. Kendrick has a very strong mental body. So he is a genius, I would know. He is extremely intelligent. His mental body is very strong. His heart chakra is a little bit weaker, so he struggles with compassion. That's his big, I think, difference between him and Tupac. Tupac was also very smart, but he also had a very open heart, and it was that heart energy that really inspired people. And I think if he wants to be a little bit more like Tupac, he could work on his heart chakra and just having more compassion and being a little bit more forgiving. I consider Kendrick to be more of a poet than a rapper. He kind of just raps poetry on a beat. Like, that's kind of his big thing. And he has a strong sense of territory, which again is the tribal mentality, but also his raising, the way that he was growing up. Kind of in a war zone. I mean, given what I've read, with gunshots going off and gang violence, it's essentially a war zone. There's so much PTSD just in this lifetime alone. It's just so sad. So Drake is a Canadian rapper. He's in his mid-30s. I believe that he's been famous for around 20 some odd years at this point, since a teenager. So he's lived his whole life mostly famous, started as a child actor. He is mixed race. His dad, I believe, is African American, but his mom is white Canadian. His early years were spent in Canada, which I assume mean to be with his mother around her more than likely mostly white family and etc. Because I know that his dad was living somewhere else or something like that. That's the best I can remember. Drake is very watery, like he's just really fluid. He lives in the areas of the in-between, from anything from like his race to being a dual citizen of the US and Canada, even the way that he just approaches life. He's very fluid, you know, and the way that he blends pop and rap. He just has a way of towing the line between two extremes and making the two extremes work together. And part of his mission on earth spiritually is perfecting that balance that he is always walking between two extremes. It's a very tricky and interesting place to be. I personally find it really fascinating that he's occupying that space. And that's part of the reason why his presence is so triggering to a lot of people who aren't really about occupying the spaces in between. They're very much on one side or the other. That's another reason why he's just very triggering to Kendrick, because like I said, Kendrick is a tribalist. He's about his region. He's about his people. Drake is very international. He really, I mean, he has his own personal group of people that I'm sure he cares about, but I don't see him being super obsessed with a particular region. He does rep Toronto, but it's not the same. It's not the same energy and frequency as like when Kendrick reps Compton. Drake is just, he's very international, he's very global, and he's very much about the spaces in between. That's where he thrives. That's where he shines. I will also say that Drake cares a lot about being popular, hence the pop music. I think he's just younger, a little bit of a younger soul. He hasn't developed a lot of like real depth. He does have a very hedonistic mentality as well, like the money and the lavishness. And again, that's not wrong. It's just like the love of the finer things. I'm getting that he actually is quite heart-centered. There's a purity of heart there. And when he loves, the love is real. And I'll just say it like that. Drake is also a little bit more balanced in his expression of his own masculinity than the rap community as a whole, which has a tendency to tend towards very hypermasculine, toxically hypermasculine presentations. And I think that his place in the industry as well adds a hint more balance between the divine masculine, divine feminine than what was previously there. And I think that's another reason for the hatred. And I think it's so interesting that that is misconstrued by a lot of people as being gay or zesty. I just think that that's really interesting. For some reason, the way rap has evolved now, it's kind of like a defense of the fragile male ego. And Drake's presence disrupts that. And I think that he's had trouble walking that line between his naturally kind of sensitive nature and the hard performative nature of rap. And I think that the way that he's explored it throughout his career is evidence of that. They had a beef because Drake had a song. It was called First Person Shooter, for those of you who want to look it up. It doesn't really matter. Kendrick took offense to the fact that in the song, he was being associated with J. Cole and Drake as one of like the big three greatest rappers alive right now, or currently working or whatever. And he started going with a diss track, and then Drake responded. 5 or 6 tracks per person later, here we are. Why did Kendrick even start this? The reasons are complex. There's not one main reason. Some of them are past life related. Some of them are current life related. One of the major current life issues revolves primarily around issues of power and envy. If you notice, a lot of people who hate on Drake, at least up until a point that They Not Like Us kind of got popular, were other black men. There weren't a lot of women like really going after Drake, dissing Drake. I didn't see a lot of gay people doing it. It's really just like other heterosexual black men who are also primarily a part of like the rap community. That to me suggests a strong hint of envy. I don't think it's something that people who diss Drake want to admit, but and I don't care, I'm just gonna say it. Like, there is a jealousy and a deep envy running through a lot of the Drake hatred and the criticism of Drake. That's just there, okay? Not everyone who hates on Drake or criticizes him is jealous, but a lot of what I see, like a lot of these diss tracks that are just being put out randomly, or, you know, Drake is minding his business and someone decides to put out a diss track, that's almost always envy. I haven't seen a lot of really good stories for why people hate Drake as well. I mean, again, the whole pet thing, I don't even know if I can say that. I'll just say the P word is a big one, but that's very recent. I'm talking about before this whole mess popped off. I was hard pressed to find like a really good story from someone who was bashing Drake or who hated Drake about why they hated him so much. Rumor has it maybe he stole someone's girl. I've heard The Weeknd say that he stole a lot of his music. That might be a quite a good reason. But beyond that, it's like, it's not like, for example, a J-Lo situation where there's so many people that she's worked with, that she's known, famous or unfamous, that has come out and said like she's crappy because of this. I haven't seen those types of stories about Drake. So then again, why all of the hate? Like, if you don't have a good reason to hate him, why do you hate him? That's another reason why I lean a little bit more towards the envy, similar to kind of what was going on with Britney Spears. All the hatred around Britney Spears is primarily an envy situation, because people couldn't stand the fact that she was really beautiful and she was talented and rich and seemed to have it all and be a good person on the inside as well. And they just couldn't let her just be happy and pretty and rich and enjoy her money. They had to like try to take her down and destroy her because it's like, it's too much good for one person to have, you know, kind of a vibe, even though it's not. But that's the mentality of a lot of people. And I think that that same mentality is shared by people who just really don't like Drake. What I'll say on my read on the rap community as a whole is that Drake is very unsettling to a lot in the rap community, because he is really the first rapper who has had, oh my God, these sirens. I think the sirens are important. I don't know why, so I'm just gonna keep them in. But Drake has had a long, sustained, very influential influence on the rap industry as a commercial product in ways that no other rapper outside of the United States has ever done before or may ever do. He is one of the most influential rappers, and arguably the most influential rapper of our time right now. So much so that all someone has to do is put out a diss track mentioning his name and wait for him to respond, and all of a sudden they're relevant again. Bashing Drake is a very easy, lazy, highly effective marketing strategy. And again, this is something that people don't necessarily want to admit, that sometimes people bash Drake to get attention because the negativity that they drum up, especially if you can respond, puts them back on the map like instantaneously. And it's just so much easier than having to really work or having to really show up and sustain their own image. It's a lot of like vampirism. I think that he has a lot of people trying to leech and feed off of him, and if he just stopped responding, like, he could literally pull a Beyonce and disappear and still more than likely be relevant. I don't think that he needs to like muck. It just feels like I'm mucking about with like lower energies and toxic energies if he didn't want to. But there is something in it for him as well, because he gets street cred, which is something that he desperately needs as someone who doesn't come from the streets. So just kind of wrap up my thoughts here on the current life issues why Kendrick bashed Drake. Again, like we said, envy. Yes, Kendrick is envious of Drake. It is what it is. Again, some of these rappers are envious of each other because they understand and respect each other's talent so much. That's not unusual. Both of these men are threatened by each other to a certain extent, but the Kendrick is much more triggered and threatened by Drake than Drake is by Kendrick. And I'm just going to put that out there. Another reason is because Kendrick does have an album coming out. That was the first download that I got. It is profit driven. He hadn't had an album in a very long time. He wants to be successful, and a very easy way to market without having to spend a lot of marketing dollars is to just go after Drake and win the rap battle. That way he can kind of come out as king, and the album is guaranteed to do well because everyone is aware that he's back, is aware that he's back on top. It was just really important for his, well, in his own mind, for his career and his legacy to take Drake down, to be able to prove to himself that he still got it, because his self-confidence really is not there at all. Like, you know, he does understand that he's a talented rapper, but he's just not as, just not as confident in himself and his ability to really make a strong kind of comeback as we would like to believe or suggest based on his past work. It's just not there, okay? Like, again, that might be the trauma, that might be the PTSD. He's mentioned a lot of abuse in the past that can really wreck someone's self-esteem. I'm just seeing a lot of self-esteem issues from him that he's projecting out onto Drake, like a lot of self-hatred that he's projecting out onto Drake, unfortunately. The final reason is that Drake is not part of Kendrick's tribe. Remember, I said that Kendrick is a tribalist, and tribalism has a tendency to run almost like a Russian doll type situation where it's like you have a tribe, and then within that you have a slightly bigger tribe, and so on and so forth. So his smallest tribe would be the people that he knows personally. His next smallest tribe would be Compton, then California, then the greater West Coast, then America. Those are his tribes, really. Drake is not a part of any of those tribes. And like I said, Drake's presence is very unsettling in the industry, and it really bothers Kendrick that an outsider is doing so well in an area that has previously only been dominated by African Americans, and that African American people, especially the men, have defended very fiercely to protect it from appropriation and etc., etc. I would personally argue that the rap industry has already been infiltrated and appropriated. It's just been done from within, with a lot of these rappers being bought and sold to white executives who then push them to talk about crap that is not useful to the Black community at all. But again, that's another video. So yes, those are all the current life reasons. However, there are more reasons because Drake and Kendrick Lamar have known each other before in past lives. So let's get into the Akashic record reading so we'll learn a little bit more about these two guys and their connection to each other. Okay, so let's start with Kendrick, because Kendrick has had several past lives in the Atlantic slave trade specifically. Now, it's one thing to have a past life as a slave. That is something that's some form of slavery is pretty common in anybody's history, but specifically the transatlantic slave trade is something that's very specific to like African American, Caribbean, and Brazilian people. Kendrick has had multiple lives. I counted at least 3 kind of back to back to back, which is staggeringly high. Most people, if they even do something like that at all, because that particular life and that particular type of slavery was unusually harmful and graphic. Most people, if they're going to do it, they do it once, and once is enough. But he has done it several times over. Now, as far as him being on the ship, he did have a lifetime where he was carried over on the ships. And then he had a couple other lifetimes where he was like born into the same bloodline scattered about the world, like one definitely in America and one in another country. I almost want to say like Colombia. That is just the word that's coming to my mind. So Colombia could have been the other one. He, like so many African American people, has experienced so many atrocities and is still working psychically, emotionally to recover from that. And a lot of what he is experiencing in his current life, growing up, hearing gunshots as he was walking down the street, which is something that he talked about in his Good Kid, Mad City album, at least to the best of my memory, is reminiscent of the intertribal warfare that was going on immediately before he was captured and sold into the transatlantic slave trade itself. So where I'm getting at is that a lot of these situations that we see with like the gang violence, again, Kendrick never has officially come out as a part of a gang, but he is associated and knows people who are part of the two most prominent, sorry, the cars drive me nuts. Everyone's in this park today. The two most prominent gangs, probably in the world, which would be the Bloods and the Crips. And the way that they kind of interact and beef is so reminiscent of tribal warfare that was going on during the slave trade and right before the slave trade as well. I mean, the slave trade was perpetuated by African people in part to further their own agendas against different tribes, as well as anybody that they felt threatened by within their own communities. So doing a little bit, I don't want to go too far off the Drake and Kendrick Lamar beef because I could do a whole other video on these two groups, like the Bloods and the Crips and gang violence. But I'll just say that one thing that I noticed as I was reading more into these gangs is really that a lot of the affiliations that come, like how somebody chooses, like where, if to be a Blood, if to be a Crip, yada yada, is past life driven. Like they are trying to seek out their old tribes. Because if you know anything about African American history, that information was lost, but it wasn't really lost. Like it's still there. It's just a matter of remembering it. And that's something, cheap plug, that my Akashic record readings can help with. But in the absence of that, there's still like a searching, searching that's going on, with young people, with all people of that in the African American community, trying to find out like their roots and stuff like that. And these gangs are almost, I'm getting them like the makeshift tents that are kind of like false idols that they've built in place of a real genuine connection to tribe and spirit. And the way that they choose where to go is from their past life connections to the people that they already know on the basis of tribe, if that makes sense. So like, for example, if I was a part of tribe A and I lost that memory, but I reincarnated and now I'm living in the Bay or wherever, and I want a sense of belonging, I will intuitively seek out other people that I remember from tribe A from way back. And if they're part of the Crips, I'm going with the Crips. If they're part of the Bloods, I'm going with the Bloods. So that's what I'll say on that. And I also do want to say, just as an aside, I was guided to study a little bit of like their dance moves, their ideologies. That is, especially the Crip walk has its origins with a specific tribe in Africa. And then one past life memory I do remember is that there was a hot debate in the magical community back when I was there as well about how many points should be in a star when casting. I specifically remember hot debates between spiritual teachers, like, do we use a 5-pointed star or do we use a 6-pointed star? And then researching the Bloods and the Crips and seeing that like the Crips is a 6-pointed star, like that's a symbol for them, and the Bloods is a 5-pointed star and that's a symbol for them. And me getting past life memories of, oh my God, I remember our tribal leaders arguing about this very thing. Is it 6 stars? Is it 5 stars? Like, and yes, there is a difference, and yes, it is important. Again, I don't want to go too much off the topic of this video. I might do a spin-off about why 5 versus 6 points in a star is important. I personally am team 6 star. Just saying. But anyway, my point is that a lot of Kendrick's affiliation to the Bay Area, and then a lot of just expanding out a little bit beyond Kendrick, like the affiliation between people and gangs in that area is completely driven by their memory of their other lives and the tribal affiliations and a desire to bring healing to those tribal affiliations. That's part of the reason why Kendrick is wanting so badly for there to be unity between the Bloods and the Crips, is because like he wants so badly to heal that karmic pattern of war that led to all of this mess. And he doesn't want that division anymore. And it's his way of trying to like heal that wound that was opened so long ago. So that is part of the reason why he's so dedicated to his city, because he has a prophet archetype. Part of the reason it's divine design, because those communities need help. They need people dedicated to their empowerment. And also because of that other life connection that he doesn't want to see repeating anymore because he knows firsthand the harm that it causes. Like, it destroys lives, it causes slavery. Drake has had past lives during the slave trade. He's had one lifetime as a mixed race, I almost want to say like houseboy. Like, what do they call the slaves in the house? But it was a little bit more elevated even than that, because his father was the head of the plantation. So I'm getting that Drake's mother was like a light-skinned Black woman, not really Creole, but kind of in that vein, right? A light-skinned Black woman who was a mistress to a white man that owned a plantation. He had Drake, who was a very light-skinned, technically Black man, but was treated well because he was the father of the head guy and his mistress. So he had like a slave status, but it was the highest slave status possible, essentially. And I'm getting very specific visions of Kendrick's past life where Drake is kind of walking through, like, it's not funny, overseeing the plantation, staring at the slaves, walking around, feeling like really good about himself. I'm getting another life where Kendrick was like whipped or injured, and he's lying on the ground, and Drake is standing over him, calling him the N-word, like with no compassion, no respect. And that is part of the reason why Kendrick really, really hates it when Drake says the N-word. He says it's just because he's from Canada or something, or like because he didn't grow up in that life. And maybe that's a current life reason why that is. But there's a deep past life trigger, and that's what it is. Like, that is why he can't really stand it when Drake uses the N-word, because he remembers a life when he was using it as an insult to Black people, you know, to people who were suffering. I will also say that during the time when Drake was living during slave times, he was not an abolitionist. He was very brainwashed into the white supremacist narrative and very much believed in the slave system. And this lifetime that he has now is one of the first times ever where he has ever even attempted to try to explore the Black side of himself with any amount of sincerity. And he is trying to do it through art and creativity, which is totally fine. A lot of, because we didn't have a written history, because that was destroyed, a lot of the ancestral codes of our ancestors are embedded in the music. So it's fine to do that there. But I think the other sticking point that's bothering some people is that there's also tremendous profit associated with that. So it's like, yes, he is exploring his ancestral side through the rap music. Like, that's how he accesses whatever's in his DNA that kind of needs to be worked through and cleared, but he's also benefiting substantially from that. And then that's kind of where the envy comes in. It's like, why does someone who hasn't suffered as much as I've suffered in this particular area now all of a sudden wants to be a little Black and is globbing up the cash? Like, isn't his suffering equivalent to my suffering? And that's kind of where, like, it's not fair. That's where you're getting the envy. And there's no good answer for that. And I don't even know if it's worth it to ask that question, like, who's suffering more? Because I think to deny yourself an aspect of your own heritage in the way that Drake has done through several of his past life and a good portion of his life growing up, you know, in Canada, like, being disconnected from that is a karmic issue in of itself. Like, that is a type of prison. So I don't think it makes sense for me personally to try to jump on that, like, who's suffering more, but just to kind of give you a sense of where Kendrick's head is at when I'm doing the psychic read on why he's so upset. That is what I got. That is why Kendrick, in one of his songs, They Not Like Us, he has this whole verse. He says, like, Atlanta was the Mecca, people trying to get rich, you're doing the same thing, you're a colonizer. Here is the verse. Once upon a time, all of us was in chains. So he's talking about his lifetime in slavery. Homie still doubled down, calling us some slaves. So I went over that. They've had a lifetime together. Atlanta was the Mecca, building railroads and trains. So Kendrick's lifetime where he was enslaved was in Georgia. Bear with me a second. Let me put y'all on game. The settlers was using town folk to make him richer. Fast forward 2024, you got the same agenda. You run to Atlanta when you need a check balance. Let me break it down for you. This is the real bleep challenge. And there's a little bit in between that, but the final line that I want you to all to know is you run to Atlanta when you need a few dollars. No, you're not a colleague, you're an effing colonizer. That's where that's coming from. He's actually channeling as best he can, like that old life where he remembers Drake profiting. And he did profit. He did go on to work and helping to sell slaves, to trade slaves, to advocate for slavery on behalf of his father, to negotiate trades. That's why Kendrick referred to him as a colonizer. And it is an interesting question. You know, if someone didn't grow up with African-American culture, Drake has even had a clip where he is like dismissed in his younger years African-American culture to now going on to embracing it and making a lot of money off it. I can understand why people would question, like, is it really sincere? I'm getting that his interest in rap is sincere, but he's very profit driven as well. You could also argue that Drake is not a colonist, a colonizer, because he actually does have African American ancestry and does to a certain extent have a right to the culture and the music of his ancestry, like all of his ancestry. You could make that argument as well. I'll put another point here as far as the Akashic record readings. I know we've talked a lot about Drake kind of not being the most pro-Black person you've ever seen and him having a negative past life with Kendrick. I also want to point out as well that in that same life, Kendrick actually did try to run away. He had the same ability to drum up mass support as he has always had, and he got a group of people to try to run away with him. And I'm hearing that he abandoned his people, like something happened and Kendrick like abandoned the people that he said he was going to help shepherd to freedom. Ultimately, everyone was caught and brought back. But that was an interesting point because I remember in Drake's video, Family Matters, when he says that you're acting like an activist, it's make believe, you're a fake messiah. Here is that verse. Out here begging for attention, bleep, say please. Always rapping like you're about to get the slaves freed. You just acting like an activist. It's make-believe. Don't even go back to your hood and plant no money trees. That is that lifetime and Drake being there and remembering like how the slaves reacted when they found out that Kendrick was kind of very self-focused in his reasoning for trying to get the others to escape. That was prompting him to call him like a fake messiah or a fake activist or whatever. That's a past life trigger for that. So both of these men have behaved in ways that have been morally and ethically suspect in their past life and present life as well. That's the nature of being a human being. Usually the person that is the most toxic is the one that starts the drama. So I think right now Kendrick vibrationally and mentally is a little bit more unstable than Drake. I will put that out there. But I'll also put out there that I really want to like both of these guys. I'm disappointed in both of these guys, but there was a trajectory for peace between these two. And if it would have happened during this lifetime, it would have been a long time coming. They need a healing moment as souls together. And I just feel like because both of them chose to perpetuate this beef, and now sue and whatever, they have rejected the peace timeline that was accessible to them to kind of come together and squash any past life issues, to kind of show solidarity across all of the diaspora, and instead get into tribalism, weird Afro-nationalism, slander, and just a bunch of other stuff. So I think that everyone who's participated in this beef, not just Drake and Kendrick, there's been a lot of other rappers that have come of Drake as well. It's just a huge missed opportunity. And I look forward to the moment where there is solidarity, where there is unity, where it's easy to come together instead of seeing these minute differences of, oh, I'm from the US, you're from Canada, yada, yada. But that they just missed the opportunity. So now it's kind of descended into war energy as opposed to peace energy. And I think that that's a very interesting reflection of where we as a humanity are, where the country as a whole is. There's just been a lot of rejection of the timeline of peace and certain pivotal moments. And I just think that this also happened in election year. I just think that it's a reflection of the fact that the trend is often to choose violence over peace. And I think that the fact that we're still doing that is very sad. Is there anything else I want to say right now? I think that's it. That's everything that I wanted to cover. Again, it's Erin Gabriella. Please like, share, subscribe if you like your own Akashic record reading, so we can do your own psychic profile between you and a significant other, whatever you want. It would be your time. I have a booking page and 40% off for new customers. I love you so much and have a great day.